Hey guys, what's going on? Ollie from flightcomp. Gonna do another Vertigo build instructional video, which is kind of weird because you'd think I'd have already gone over everything there is to go over on the Vertigo. But we actually have a new part, which is a solid core foam center panel. So this is what's coming on the Vertigos now if you order one. And the main reason we went with the solid core center panels is just to save production time because the hollow was just taking too long. You can still request a hollow panel if you want one, by the way. Anyway, so the first thing we're going to do is route the wires through the center panel. The channels are already cut for you. I've already routed my wires, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how I did that right now. Okay, excuse the 3D printer noise in the background. I'm working on a pretty big print, so it takes a few hours, so it's just gonna buzz away. One of the first things you gotta do on the solid core Vertigo center panel is run some wire through the panel for going out to the tips for the aileron servos, and then also little bits of wire here for your flap servos. I'm going to pull the wires through from this side, and I'm just going to use a bit of really thin piano wire or steel wire with a little hook on the end, and I'm just going to wrap the wire around that and tape it on and then pull it through. Okay, so that wire fed through the channel that's in the core really easily, no problem at all. And now I'm going to hook up the servo wire to that hook on the end there. Servo wire is on the hook, and I used a little bit of tape just to secure it. And now I'm going to go ahead and pull this through. Hopefully we won't snag and it'll pull through really easily. Seems to be going really nicely. And we are out the other end. So job done on that. Obviously you repeat the same thing for the other side, and then we're going to have to put that little bit of wire through here. On this particular model, I'm using the Blue Bird M15 servos, which have a removable pigtail. Here's the pigtail here. So I'm actually just going to use, it's long enough that I'm actually just going to use the pigtail that came with the servo. So I've taken off the servo connector on this side and just wrapped a little bit of tape around the end to bundle the wire together, so hopefully it won't get stuck. And I'm just going to attempt to actually just push it through by hand. Hopefully it will actually go through. And yep, came out the other side to the center, no problem. See if I can just grab this. There we go. Cool. Okay, so I'm probably going to use some masking tape and tape this down somehow so it won't get pulled through again. And then on the end, I've also taped down this side just so it won't pull through, because we're not going to be getting to this for a while. So that's how you pull the servo wires through, and then, you know, obviously we need to solder on a connector here later on. Oh, I have to put this one through too, I forgot. Let me see if I can push this one through by hand. This wire is a little looser, so I don't think that's going to go through there by hand. Okay, well I did tape up the end, and I managed to push it through without using the steel wire. It was a little trickier than the other wire, but it was no problem. So there we go. Okay, that's how you run the wires through on the Vertigo solid core center panel. Okay, so after you get your wires done, the next thing you're going to want to do is cut channels for your linkages through the foam. I've done it already on this side, and I haven't done it yet on this side. But basically, you're going to be about 1 millimeter off the edge here, or 1 or 2 millimeters. You're going to be basically right up against this sidewall. And you're going to cut a channel coming from the servo bay. And you're also going to cut that channel coming this way through the sub rib. So I'll show you how I did that right now. I have made my measurement, and I took a measurement 5 millimeters from this edge out. So not from the actual cutout, but from the step in the recess here. 5 millimeters. Obviously I put masking tape on the wing, marked the wing, and then I used a square on the hinge line to draw the line, transferred it up the flap, around the other side, and I've also put a piece of tape on the sub root, or the sub trailing edge here, where we're going to cut in this way. So now I have to make a mark here where I want to cut the slot. I'm simply just going to transfer this line onto this piece of masking tape. Okay, so I used an X-Acto knife, and after I transferred the line to the sub trailing edge there, I used an X-Acto knife to cut away the carbon. And now I'm going to start using some series of files, and I'm going to make that channel for the linkage, and I'm going to work it from this side and from the servo bay side. Okay, got my channel cut using that file you see sticking out there. I went through from that side and from this side here. Okay, after you cut your channels, you're going to want to cut slots in the flaps to accept the control horns. I've already done this one, although it's not glued in, and I'll show you how I'm going to do this side. Here's the flap horn. This is just the way it comes in the kit. I have actually sanded this with coarse sandpaper on the sides. And then what I'm going to do is use a file, just something like this, and put some notches in on the edges just to give the resin that we use to glue this in a little more bite, a little more surface area. Okay, here's what the horn looks like after I put some notches in it. So we should get a pretty good bond with this. So here's the linkage that comes with the kit to make your flap connections. And I've already done one here. You basically have to put an L-bend at one end, and obviously you have to mark it according to where your servo arm is. I just wanted to mention that they do give you a piece of carbon tubing, and you can slide this tubing over the linkage before you make your bend and glue it in place. So maybe you'd scuff this up with some sandpaper, put a little bit of glue here, and then slide this on. And that's just going to help stiffen up your linkage. I really don't think it's necessary for the light models, but for the strong models, that might be a good option for you. I marked the spot where we're going to cut out the skin on the flap to get the slot going for our control horn. As you can see, it's inboard of our rod here. So if I pull the rod out, you can see the line, and then about a millimeter over, and then I start the slot. So that center line of that slot is probably about 2.5 millimeters inboard of this line. So again, I'm going to use my X-Acto knife. I'm going to cut that slot out, then I'm going to start working that slot with the same file. Okay, so the slot is cut for the control horn. I've just dropped it in there temporarily. And as you can see, there's about a 2 millimeter, actually it is 2 millimeter recess into the top surface. Sort of a notch. So if I pull that out, you can see what I'm talking about there. I removed 2 millimeters of the top surface just to allow the control horn to sink in properly. Basically, you're going to want to glue it to where it sits in just like this. Basically flush. Like the leg of it would be flush with this surface here. And then I've marked right here where I'm going to cut a notch to allow the horn to recess into the wing. And I'm also going to cut below that a little bit to give the horn room to go under the skin. Okay, there's what it looks like, the recess for the control horn. You can see when I move the flap up, the horn has a place to go, and we have plenty of travel, actually way more than enough. And this is what it looks like without the tape over it. So, I mean, I tried to do it as clean as possible. Obviously, you can make all these cuts, you know, much bigger, but it would look worse. But I'm trying to make it as clean as possible. Well, you can see here on the sub-trailing edge of this center panel, there's kind of a weird cutout going on here. And that's to allow, obviously, the flap linkage to pass through. And then we have sort of a smaller relief next to that to let the control horn recess into the center panel for up deflection. And then there's also another little channel to let the end of the L bend go under the skin. So it kind of looks like this. So you have your main channel here, which is for your linkage rod. Then you have a little kind of indent here, which is a recess for the tip of the horn to go in, and then this recess here, which will let the L bend go under the skin. So this and this don't have to be deep. Just, you know, maybe three or 4 millimeters here, and about 2 millimeters on this one. And then I've also cut a small little notch right here. That's about a 3 millimeter long notch, just to help that horn get under the skin. Alright, I put the wire in there just temporarily just to show you how this works. I cut the slot for the little bit of the L bend to go into, and that's how it works. So everything kind of tucks under the skin pretty good, and you only have just a little tiny cut on the top skin, you know, to get everything to work. So it's still really a really clean setup. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to take that tape off, and then we're going to move on to gluing the control horns in here. But you have to glue the control horns in with the wire already installed. So you need to make up both wires, and then you can move on to gluing the control horns. Alright, I have a piece of tape holding my flap at the full down deflection. I have the rod put through, attached to the horn, and I have my servo in here temporarily in place. And then I'm just going to grab a Sharpie, and we're just going to mark the rod there where we need to make the bend, and then just pull it out and make the bends, and do that for both sides. And then we can move on to gluing the control horns and the flaps. We're just about ready to glue the horns in. One thing I did was I put some mold release wax in the hinge right here, just to keep any epoxy from actually bonding to the hinge line. You can kind of see it rubbed in there. Both sides. You could also use maybe some Vaseline or oil or grease or something like that. Just put a little bit in the hinge line there just to protect the hinge line. The other thing I've done is cut a few pieces of this plastic tubing out. I'm just going to use these as shims to hold the horn in the right spacing, and I'll show you how that basically is going to set up once I get the horns installed. But these are just little bits of pushrod tubing. They probably have a millimeter wall thickness. Okay, so I'm going to mix up some epoxy and we're going to get the horns in. Alright, I put epoxy in the slots on both sides. Here's my epoxy here. And I'm using a very high quality slow cure epoxy. And it's thickened a little bit with some Cabasil. Not too thick. I want it to still be able to run a little bit because I want it. I'm putting the epoxy in with the flaps basically kind of down, so the epoxy is going to run down into the slot that I've made. So now it's time to get the horns in there and the linkages. Finally, we have the horns installed, and now you can see how I use those spacers, those pieces of plastic tubing, just to hold the horns at the right height. I did have some epoxy ooze out, and I just did my best to clean it all up. But that's another reason why we have all this masking tape everywhere, is that we can protect the wing surface and the paint from the epoxy. And this is really slow curing epoxy, so probably in the morning when this is, it's not actually in the morning, it won't be fully cured, it'll still be somewhat gummy, and I could probably peel all that tape off of there. So we'll let that cure up really good, and then we're going to move on to gluing the servos in. Alright, well, I'm moving on to gluing the servos in the servo bays. And I've already put in the fiberglass pads that come with the kit. I used the same kind of thickened epoxy. And if you want more detail about this, just go and look at the aileron servo install on my previous videos that I've done on the Vertigo, because it's an identical installation. So what I'm going to do now is just put some epoxy on the bottom there, and I'm going to slide and push the servos in place onto the linkage. And I've also taped the flaps at the full down position, and we are mounting the servos in with the arms at the full down position as well. So I put some weight on the servos, and they're all hooked up to the linkages. And I'm just going to let this dry for probably at least 24 hours, and we'll see how it comes out. Okay guys, the epoxy's all cured up, servos are installed, and I just want to show you the flap travel I'm getting. So we're getting full down travel. And we're getting plenty of up travel. So everything came out really good. The length of the servo arm from center to center is 6.5 millimeters. And I think you could also get away with going down to 6 or 5.5 millimeters. So I'm going to say something in the range of 5.5 to 6.5 millimeters on your servo arm, and you'll get good results with your travel. So I think I'm just going to wrap it up here, because doing the servo covers and buttoning up the wire at the root, it's all the same as the hollow center panel that I already did a video on, so I don't think I need to go over that stuff again. So that was just a look at how to assemble the new solid core center panel on the Vertigo. I hope you guys found this useful in some way, and I will see you guys in the next video.